Hey guys, in this section we're going to talk about scope functions in Kotlin. Kotlin has 5 of them: let, with, run, apply, and also. Now, scope functions are essentially what they are. They define a function which executes in a temporary scope on a context object. And they differ from each other in the way they refer to that object in the scope and also by the return type. It could be either a lambda or the context object itself. Now, let's see what I mean. Now, let's take a look at the first one, which is let. Now, let essentially avoids lets you avoid the null pointer exception. So in order to see that, let's define a fruits list here, which will be of type mutable list, so that you can add something into it, and it'll be of type string. And I'll also define this as nullable, which means the value can be null. However, I'm going to assign it a mutable list and I'm going to put in a value in there. Now, the way the let scope functions works is you're going to define the fruit list here, and then you're going to do a let here and then put it in a block. The way you would refer to this fruits list inside this block of code will be it. So you could do something like it.add, you can add some values in it, execute some business logic, and essentially here, since it is defined as nullable, you can define it with the safe call operator right at the top here when you use the let keyword, and you don't have to use the question mark or the safe call operator inside that block because you've already done that in the let. And that's the reason why you would use let, because I'm essentially telling here that do not execute this block of code if this value is null, right? And you could add additional business logics in here. You could do some print statements. You could even sort it, so if you could put in some functions like sorting and etc., just like that. So it kind of is a safe way of doing things, and it makes the code look a little cleaner. If you did not use the let keyword, you would probably have to do it something like this: fruitlist.add, and then add your value, and then you could do fruitlist.sort. So every time you'd have to use this. So instead of this, I'm essentially defining a block of code which is going to execute only if this fruit list is not null. So that is the let keyword. Next, let's talk about the with scoped function. Now, for the with scope function, you would have to check whether the context object is null or not. So let me put it inside a nullable check block. So I will do a fruits list not equal to null. I'm doing this because I have defined fruit list as nullable. In this case, I have assigned a value. However, if you are, let's say, making a business logic call or doing some sort of operation or some sort of API call, this might be a null value, right? So you just want to make sure that your object is not null before you do something on it. So we're going to do with and put in your context object, which is the subject in question, and inside the scope block for the with, you would refer to the context object as this. So you can do a this.add, and then you add some value in it. So the way I think of the with scoped function is essentially kind of a utility. So let's say you want to do a lot of operations on it: add, remove, execute some business logic, make it return some value. It's useful to use the with scoped function and then make it return a lambda. So in this case, it returns a boolean since I am adding something in it. But let's say you want to return a string. So I am going to assign a value here called result, and I'm going to define a string. And then the last statement, I would just say something like added. And then if you want to just, print that value, you can just print your result. And that's pretty much it. So this is the with keyword. Next, we'll take a look at the run scoped function. And the run is essentially a combination of both the let and the with scope function. So you can use it like an extension, which means like you could use it as a dot operator notation like this. And since this is a nullable, I can just do a safe call here so that I can refer to this object in the scope function as this. So I can do an add in here, so which will be some value. It's useful when you want to return a form of an expression. However, you can even run it as just a block of code. So you could just run it like this without the non-extension, and you can just, this can just print a bunch of statements or do something usually used when you want to return some value and execute some business logic or things like that. So you would use something like a result here, and then you would just return some value in here. So I could just return something like a list of some other fruits. So this is so essentially what I'm doing is I'm just executing a piece of code. We'll execute some business logic in here and then return some value. It could be a string, it could be whatever the last statement is, that will be the return statement, that'll be the return value for this run block. So that's what it's used for. However, if you just want to use it like an extension on an object, you would use the dot operator there. And if this is a nullable object, you would have to make the safe call operator. If you do not do this, it is going to complain, and you have to do this inside the scope block. So you would use this like that. Now we'll take a look at the apply and also scoped functions. In order to do that, let me just delete this code and let me create a data class called student. So apply and also are pretty much similar to each other. They differ with the fact that how they refer to the context object in the scope block. So you'll see that what I mean in a minute. So let's create a data class called student, and we'll give some properties to the student. So in this case, let's give him a name, which will be of type string, and then an age, which will be of type integer, and we are going to give in an initial value as well. And in order to understand apply, let's first create an object, student, which will be of type student. So let's create an object. And once you've created this object, you can directly use apply here. So it's essentially you're doing some operations on the student object. Let me give an initial value as a blank string, and let's use the apply scope function. And here, as you can see, you'll have to refer to the object as this. So either use the this keyword or just omit it, and then you just give in some values to the student, and in this case age will be equal to an integer value. Now had you not used apply, you would have to use something like this, name equal to, assign the values like this. So if it's a big object, there's a lot of complex operations happening, so apply would be a good option to use. You're essentially applying information into that object. Also functions exactly like apply, so you would just do also, and then inside this, it's like it's like creating an object and then also doing something along with it. So that could be some business logic or just applying values in it. However, you have to use the it keyword in order to refer to those values, and you could execute some business logic. So like I said, they're pretty much similar to each other. The only way they differ from each other is the way they refer to the object in the scope block, and the return value will always be the student object. So anything that you do on this will be the result. And this is the student object. You could print the age, print the name, and so on and so forth. And that's it for Kotlin scope functions. They are pretty handy if you're dealing with complex business logic and if you want to just make your code more readable. It's essentially syntactic sugar. However, they make your code easier to read, easier to understand.